The headlines on RT International. France is in a state of war, and it's going to be a long battle. This from President Hollande after a deadly terror act at a Catholic church carried out by followers of Islamic State.
#NeverHillary.
And scuffles erupt outside the Democratic Party convention as Hillary Clinton gets the nomination for the upcoming US presidential election. The Scottish fishing industry calls on its pro-EU government to back off from closer ties with Brussels, arguing that the Brexit will bring back their entire business. Just turning midday in Moscow. Thanks for joining us here on RT International. President Hollande has declared France is at war after Islamic State followers slashed a priest's throat in a terror assault on a Catholic church.
We are facing Islamic State, which has declared war. We must fight this war using all means. I owe you also this truth. This war will be long.
Both terrorists were killed by police snipers after running out of the church. A massive search for possible accomplices still underway. We understand at least one arrest has already been reported. And RT's Anastasia Churkina visited Saint-Étienne-de-Rouvray, a small town in northern France, and asked whether this incident marks a new stage in extremist terror.
Over there it's written liberty, equality, fraternity. Now I don't even recognize this country anymore.
The small northern French town of Saint-Étienne-de-Rouvray, home to just 27,000 people, has been shaken.
It scares me that this happened here, in my hometown. I'm shocked. When I go out, I will feel scared for my safety.
Their tactics are vile. To attack a church, a priest, in the way they did, is inhumane.
Tactics that are becoming more unpredictable at a time when terror has gripped Europe like never before. The methods were previously associated with public transport, airplanes, bombs and firearms used in crowded settings. To date, jihad in Europe reaches the most remote locations. The sheer frequency of the killings is keeping ISIL constantly in the media spotlight, with a greater impact on public fear than ever. And they only need the crudest of weapons. Tragedy to hit France less than 2 weeks after a truck was used as a weapon in Nice to kill dozens and injure hundreds unraveled here. Except now it was 2 men and just 2 knives who made an 85-year-old Christian priest who served the small local community the face of this latest chilling tragedy, sending France back into shock. In the Normandy murder, a 19-year-old who had attempted to reach Syria to fight alongside ISIS and spent a year behind bars in France still outsmarted those running a country in a state of emergency, despite being monitored on a daily basis. And even more frighteningly, he's not alone. Europol officials warn of thousands of so-called foreign fighters having fought alongside Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, a third of them estimated to now be back in the EU. Hundreds, officials say, are potential terrorists.
They need to be detained. People like that shouldn't be roaming free. That's not possible.
I think the Islamist groups are everywhere.
The politicians know who the radicals are. They have their names, and nothing is being done about it.
Reporting from Saint-Étienne-de-Rouvray in Normandy, Anastasia Churkina, RT.
The Catholic Church targeted in the attack, as well as its victim, a priest, evoke memories of purges carried out by ISIL militants against Christians in the Middle East. A warning: the following video is disturbing.
They stole property, destroyed churches, tore the monastery to the ground, threw away all the shrines. Our Christian sisters were taken away by force.
when you look at the extreme brutal methods that ISIS has used against Christians, where they are controlling the caliphate and in Syria and Iraq. It was evident that they would start doing the same thing in Europe, and now it's here. And I think it's extremely alarming, and I think it's even more alarming that our political leaders are in a kind of denial. They do not want to acknowledge that there is this religious motivated violence going on, and I think that is really the problem. And we heard today President Hollande say this is not a religious war, this is what they want us to believe or to start even. And I think it's a huge problem that neither the church or our political leaders in Europe wants to identify this evil as a spiritual battle, because it's not only a political battle, it's also a spiritual battle. And nobody here wants to talk about that. And I think that's even more alarming, because if we can't identify the enemy, we cannot fight it either.
My colleague Neil Harvey discussed the situation in Europe and the recent wave of killings with political commentators David Vance and Mo Ansar.
Fundamentally, we have a savage ideology here, radical Islam, and it's at war. And that's the simple truth of this. And be it in a little Normandy church, or be it wherever, we need to face into the fact that they have declared war on civilization.
One of the things we learned about the Nice attacks and many of these other attacks is these are not being perpetrated by people who are following Islam or even a radical view of Islam. Often these have been people who have been career criminals, irreligious, about as far away departed from. They're as representative of Islam as Anders Breivik is of Christians, or as Tony Blair is of English people, let's put it that way. I mean, people who perpetrate great heinous acts of inhumanity are not representing any faith, not even a radical version of it.
Yeah, look, the clue is in the name, Islamic State. It's obvious for anyone who wants to see that these people eschew radical Islam, and they carry out these acts of savagery in the name of radical Islam.
I think part of the huge difficulty is that when we look at the history of France and we look at the history of these communities who are disenfranchised, and just without trying to distract too much, I've brought along this evening a list of countries which have been attacked by France over the last 150 years. The list goes on and on and on in the Muslim world. Now, these kids, the parents from these countries, came to France, they've settled, they live in banlieue, they live in the most poorest and disenfranchised communities. That is no excuse for terrorism, that is no excuse for violence, but when you're denied jobs, when you're denied housing, health and education and training, and you're discriminated against in every part of society, you end up hating your host nation, which is completely unacceptable, but this is the reality.
Mo made the point that these countries like France, and indeed like the UK and many other countries, have taken in significant numbers of Muslim people. Many of those Muslim people do integrate, but there is a section that doesn't, and that section has been allowed to carry on its own particular way, and we see now the poison fruit right across the European continent.
How can you integrate if you're denied every opportunity for civil engagement, for jobs, for money, for income, in terms of housing, health and education? Your home countries have been torn apart.
Being denied the social advantages that you claim is no excuse to go out and to slit the throat of a priest, to mow down 84 people.
I agree with you. We're asking about integration. You're raising the issue about integration, and I'm asking, how can you integrate in that situation?
The fact of the matter is that this section of Islam isn't interested in integration. You're suggesting that somehow, given benign social circumstances, they would. They don't, and they won't. The fact is, this is a very savage ideology, radical Islam.
We've spent more than a century killing people overseas, and these are chickens coming home to roost, and I think that's the reality we have to face.
Islamic chickens.
We should learn to live with terrorism. We are facing a war that terrorism has started against us.
The entire EU is Germany. Its focal point is the target of international terrorism. And we have to expect attacks by small groups of radicalized lone operators